Thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate having you here.
Delighted to be here, Shawna.
All right, so I know just because you and I have spoken off camera and time before, why don't you tell us a little bit about Wakefully and what you've created and how you got involved in the health and wellness field as far as sleep and dreaming goes.
Okay, I'll try to take you through a zoomed version. I grew up in the world of storytelling. I started in theater, then film and TV. I started as an actor, moved into screenwriting, and eventually producing. I sold a project to Comedy Central. I co-produced with Kevin Hart and Bill Burr. For me, story was, and whichever side of the map of that world of the entertainment industry I was on, it was always about connecting to humans and maybe impacting somebody's life through storytelling. Story is the only way we know how to communicate, is the only way we know how to understand ourselves in the world, and is a very powerful way where we can impact each other's lives and we can learn and teach through it and send messages through it. But meanwhile, what I realized is that we're ignoring the most important stories. The most important stories are created in our subconscious nightly. They're like, think about it like your own little movie theater, except that your subconscious is the screenwriter, the producer. You are the director. Your mind is the lighting designer. You are the hero and you're the only audience member. So these are stories that our own mind communicates to us. And just like in a movie or a book for that matter, it wants to communicate something to you. It's not so much about what the dream is, it's more about what the decoded version is. What is the narrative behind the dream? And the narrative behind the dream often exposes that narrative of how you perceive your life, how you've really experienced your life. So you went through a ton of events. We take in a lot of information. We have 60,000, up to 60,000 thoughts per day. 95% of them are exactly the same thoughts we had yesterday. 80% of them are negative. So we're trapped in those negative thought loops where everything gets filtered through through my already biased, limiting belief on myself that I can never raise money for my startup and that I just am not worthy and it's just not in my blood and it's just not for me or I don't understand it. And that's a story. Everything we think is a story. And I like to say, don't believe, people like to say that don't believe everything that everybody tells you, don't believe everything the internet tells you. I like to say, don't believe everything your mind tells you.
Mm.
Your mind's going to tell you a lot of stories. 80% of them have a negative bias. So, getting into dreams again, this is how we expose that narrative because the dream will show you how you really felt, something that you thought, no, it's not even worth my response. It's not, it was nothing. You put it aside, you go, it was nothing. Then you dream that that person, what they said or what they did, you dream that they are betraying you in the dream. Now, it doesn't mean that this was a big betrayal. The dream is always going to dramatize everything, but it will alert you to the fact that there was a place in you that you felt a little like they didn't have your back, maybe. And so now you have agency. Now you have a choice what you want to do with it.
Wow. I think that's amazing. I think that was one of the most impactful things for me and my family in using your app is that there were things that we would focus on in our dreams that really actually weren't all that important, right? Maybe it was the situation of where we were, or
Yes.
maybe it was the snake that was in front of us, or maybe it was, but your app really helped us to hone how we were feeling, to identify the most important part of the dream in our own viewpoint, right? And maybe that was something entirely different. And then how you were feeling in the dream. So you could see a snake and there could be a fire, burning building, but you're not worried or you're not fearful or you're not going to run, right? And it's like, well, that's interesting. And I would never have focused on that before until I used your app and I was able to really see and reframe things and understand maybe what my subconscious was actually trying to tell me in that dream was so different than what I thought the message from the dream was.
And it's so individual. There's no way I could tell you what your dream means unless I ask you questions about what you associate with different elements in your dream. As an example, I had a client who had the image of blood in her dream, and I think it started with red. The client had the image of something red, and I said, "Well, what do you associate with red?" And I'm thinking danger. And she said blood. And I'm thinking gore.
Mhm.
And I said, what do you associate with blood? And she said, renewal, rebirth. We need blood
Ah.
in our vessels. It's life.
Mm.
Completely different meaning when she dreams about blood and I dream about blood. So some of it is taken from our cultural, but also from personal experiences. Maybe somebody was bitten by a dog. I was born into a family with two older sisters and a Great Dane. Obviously, my relationship to the image of dog is very different than somebody who's been bit by a dog or
Sure.
somebody who lives in India, where they don't really appreciate dogs as a pet as, as much as here when
Right.
they are almost equivalent to our children.
Right. Well, the thing that I found most helpful is not only as a sleep expert and as a sleep coach, really becoming in tune with my REM cycles, really becoming in tune with the multiple dreams that I would have throughout the night because I wanted to wake up and I wanted to put them in the app and I wanted to participate right in this beta program that you were running. And so that made me much more mindful. Can you talk about how you feel that not only learning about your dreams, but how that can improve your sleep as well?
Yes, so there are many ways. To start with, the minute that you just set an intention and say, I will remember my dreams in the morning. I want to remember my dreams in the morning. If you really mean it, you say it to yourself, repeat it 5 times for 3, 4 nights, you're going to start remembering your dreams. And even if it's fragments, you can put everything in the app. We can deal with anything. It could be anxious, closed space, monkey, it could be anything. Um, There are many people who have recurring, let's say, distressful dreams or all the way to flat out nightmares.
Mhm.
Part of what this does, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy and it's a vicious cycle because um, you then don't sleep well. You're afraid to go to sleep because you're afraid to have that nightmare, or you wake up from it and you don't want to go back to it. So now your body is trying to resist sleep. Now you don't sleep as well. Now during the day, you are much more prone to
Mm.
anxiety, depression, because your mind hasn't gotten to refresh itself and it just becomes, and therefore your limiting beliefs are getting more in the forefront and you're already with more of that negative bias and it just becomes this vicious cycle. So uh, the worst thing you can do about recurring dreams, distressful dreams, nightmares is to leave them alone.
Mm.
And that's what the inclination is of most people. They go, I don't want to look at my dreams. It's too scary. That's the worst thing you can do because the less you look at it, the more this becomes this amorphous monster that just has no shape because you wouldn't look at it. And so it becomes the shape of your worst nightmares, right? Of your worst imagination. The best thing you can do to alleviate that is anything you do with a dream. To start with, just thinking about the dream, just looking at it, just writing it down, just talking about it with a friend, just putting it through an app. What we do is, I like to call it deconstructing the monster. Suddenly, when you turn, and in your waking mind, when you know you are safe, there's no monster, you're not running in a forest, there's no fire, you know you're in a safe room, looking in the dream on the at the dream from this safe environment, you are basically looking at this monster, you start giving it shape. You go, okay, I see an eye here and a fang there and a whisker there and some claws. But now it becomes a collection of pieces, and you're like, okay, well, that's not so scary. You We're breaking it down to pieces, just like any summit, climbing a summit, just like facing anything. It helps to break it down to pieces, and that's what we help you do. And then we have one of our tools. We actually help you rewrite that dream and rehearse that, meaning read that rewritten, and that's where my Hollywood background comes to play. And the fact that I am our chief prompt engineer, I'm able to design an AI that will create this very like fun Hollywood empowering script that again, through question and answer, we really get to what is it that you prefer to feel? So maybe you felt trapped and you want to feel free and you want to feel like you have agency, you want to feel empowered, whatever it is, and we'll rewrite it into this beautiful scene. And you will rehearse it. You'll read it every night. And once again, you read it for a few nights, you will dream about that dream again. And I'm not saying it's going to be apples to apples. It's not going to be necessarily exactly that same script, but by now you have embedded it into your subconscious that there is another way out. And so suddenly within that same scenario that you always get to see, suddenly your subconscious will go, hang on, and it will change it. And the
Mm.
dream will change. And this is a highly effective technique that is used even with PTSD, with people suffering from PTSD, and used by the National Association of Sleep Medicine, and used in clinical environments widely with up to 90% success.
Yeah, I noticed what a difference it made for my child, really. Because same thing, reoccurring nightmares, disturbing her sleep, which then in turn disturbed my sleep, right? And so for her to not only A, have a way to break down the dream and understand it, which made it less scary, right? But also then B, to have your script pop up afterwards in a way that reframes the dream that then I could screenshot and I could send to her iPad and she could read at night before she went to bed because she would start to get worked up when she would get in bed at night and she would be afraid to fall asleep because she was really worried about, redreaming this terrible dream that she had had 2 or 3 nights in a row. And it's always something where the family is dead or she's alone or there's a plane crash or the house is burned down and she can't get out, right? It's always something where she doesn't have control over the situation. And so that was such a huge piece that you gave to her, a peace of mind, which then in
Oh,
turn
thanks.
made our family better because then my husband and I were able to sleep again and we were
This
able to
is
be
what
more
I
high
live for,
performing. And
Shawna.
and then she's happier because then she's sleeping better and she gets up and she can go to school and she can deal with all the unknowns that are in her life. And it just gives a set of tools. And I love the scripts that come up, because I agree where they were dramatized, they were exciting, they were, ways that you could tell, just like in the dream where everything was so over the top and big and dramatic. That's what the redreaming phase was too. So you were really able to meet it sort of eye to eye. Because if I were to come up with my own script or if she had come up with hers, I do not think it would have been as exaggerated as yours. And that's
Right.
really what the
He
mind
needs that.
needs. Yeah.
Think about our dreams. They're very exaggerated, and think about those stressful dreams. If you think about your most stressful dreams, if you didn't have that safe playground of the mind to get out all these pent up emotions, think how you would wake up with all this pent up stuff. This is for us to practice emotional coping strategies.
Mm.
Our mind is a predictive machine. And so it's going to predict based on the past, and it's going to connect something that happened to you today with something that got triggered from the past that you didn't really even have time to pay attention to, and you may not even be aware of. But suddenly you wake up with that. So the dreams help us regulate emotionally, but they also help bring to the surface. And I know that sometimes it feels like, well, I wake up not that emotionally regulated because some things need a really strong message. And that's why our brain dramatizes it. It really wants to be clear. It wants to be theatrical like me.
Mm. But that's great because that's not something that comes naturally for me the way it does for you. So being able to have access to your app and being able to have access to things that are written in that way, I found was really much more powerful than if I had just sat down and, done it myself, or if I just tasked her with it, like, well, redream it in a way where the burning down of the house is something that's a positive, or, that's what she wouldn't have
Absolutely.
been able to do it in the way that you did it. So I thought there was huge value in that.
again, after death and burn, there's regeneration.
Right.
So, there's always another facet to things.
That's
And
wonderful.
there's another way. And, this is really a major piece of it was my getting into mindfulness practices such as meditation and really understanding that, and this ties back to you are not your thoughts.
Mhm.
It's okay, you're going to have some thoughts that are not super helpful.
Mhm.
It's okay to have them. There's no reason to resist them. There's no point in resisting them because resisting them is only going to make them pop out in other ways. So you have to accept them and kind of be in this radical acceptance and forgiveness of them. But the minute you start becoming the observer of your thoughts, and this is something Eckhart Tolle talks about, Joe Dispenza talks about, you become the observer of your thoughts, then you are no longer identified with the thoughts. When I realized that I just had a thought, oh, really? You think you're going to raise, and I have a story related to that, so that's why I'm bringing it up. You think you're going to raise funds for your startup? Who do you think you are, and why would they give you money? Um, it's okay to have that thought, but until I realized that I can become the observer, I was identifying with that thought. That thought was my reality. And so it perpetuated that kind of reality until I realized that by me observing the thought and going with no judgment, going, okay, that's a thought. I don't have to believe it. I
Mhm.
don't have to become it. Then I'm able to, then it starts, transmuting it into something different. Then it no longer has that hold over you.
Mhm.
And a great story that is, part of my, people like to say their origin story. I, of course, have an origin dream with Wakefully. And that was during the very chaotic early pandemic days. New York City was trauma central. I had just been through one of those early pandemic breakups. Relationship implosion, was thrown out of the place that I called home for 5 years, really hanging between earth and sky, not knowing everything is the unknown, not seeing friends, isolated, bootstrapping my company, just feeling panicked. And I had this dream where I found myself standing at the edge of a cliff with two other versions of me.
Mhm.
So there was the male embodiment of me and the female energy part of me, but they were embodied as two other Sansans. And then there was little me, the one who is that limiting beliefs, afraid, panicked. I've never done it. I can't. I won't succeed. I'll die. It's not going to work. It never works. And it wasn't like a big heroic moment. We were getting somewhere and there was nothing that was going to reach an edge of a cliff. So our only way to get anywhere was to jump. And so we jump over the cliff and now we are in midair over the abyss. It's just abyss everywhere. And fear-based me goes, are we falling? And higher wisdom me go, no, we're flying.
Mhm.
And it was like a flip of the switch. The abyss opened to this beautiful blue sky, picturesque countryside, like almost cartoon like French
Mhm.
countryside. Here we were flying, floating peacefully towards our destination. And that dream really flipped my switch on being, during pandemic and anxiety and breakup and isolated and first time founder, non-technical founder, woman founder, solo founder, immigrant founder. 2 days later, I closed my pre-seed investors.
Wow.
So what my ability, and that's what Wakefully gives people, and that's what I wanted to build, was that ability to take the message from the dream. The dream was the higher wisdom, me telling myself, if you decide you're flying, you can just like let go and fall. But if you decide you're flying, and if you believe it, because if you decided it and you said it, then you have to believe it. It's part of you. Then the world is going to come and meet you there.
Mhm.
And that's when my mindset of who are you? How are you going to raise money for a startup? You're a non-technical founder, you're a first-time founder, all of the story, all the thoughts that my mind had that were stacked against me were were dispelled by knowing that.
Wow. That's an amazing origin story.
Thank you.
All right, so how can people find Wakefully? Tell me all about it and where you are on social media and everything about it.
We're on both app stores, Wakefully AI Dream Decoder, but I think if you just search Wakefully, it's like Wakefully. Wakefully.io is our website. Wakefully.io is our handle on Instagram, TikTok, um, etc. We're also partnering with coaches, coaching platforms. We're on wellness marketplaces, creating collaborations with wellness resorts and retreats. And so there's a lot more in the works.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much for joining me today. I love your
My
product,
pleasure.
and it was just such a lovely chance I got to interview you. I was so thrilled we were able to do this.